Some secrets live so long inside you that they start to feel like part of your body. Like a bone you broke years ago, healed wrong, but still there. Mine lived in my chest. Heavy, silent, unmoving. For 20 years, I thought I was keeping it buried to protect myself. But the truth is, silence doesn't protect you. It just traps you. And for 2 decades, I lived inside that trap. Slow fade to a window streaked with rain. The reflection of a man's face, early 40s, tired eyes. It started to feel like maybe this was it, the life I deserved. A job I didn't care for, a flat that never really felt like home, and a mind that never let me sleep. But then, one ordinary morning in 2018, my life, my prison, began to crack. It was jury duty. A random envelope through the letterbox. Civic service, they called it. Most people dread it. I didn't. I thought maybe it'd be a distraction, something to take my mind off the weight that never lifted. I remember sitting in that wooden box, pen tapping against the notepad they gave us. The air smelled like coffee and floor polish. The judge's voice was steady, rehearsed, like someone who said the same words too many times to care about them anymore. But then the first witness was called. A woman, early 30s, maybe, nervous hands. She started talking, haltingly at first. Then it all came out, what had been done to her, how it broke her, how long it took just to say it out loud. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Her voice trembled, her eyes watered. But there was something in the way she kept talking, through the tears, through the fear, that felt like defiance. And I couldn't look away, because I saw myself in every pause, every tear, every shaky breath. By the third witness, I was barely breathing. Their pain had echoed mine, almost perfectly. And then came the thought, sharp, violent, and unstoppable. It's not over. He's still out there. And I let him walk free. That moment, that realization, it didn't feel like guilt. It felt like waking up. Like after 20 years of drowning quietly, I'd finally broken the surface. After the trial, I sat in my car for a long time. Didn't turn the key. Didn't check my phone. Just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking, and I didn't know why. Was it anger? Fear? Relief? I didn't know. I only knew one thing. That stone in my chest, the one I'd carried since I was 17, had just shifted. For the first time, I wanted to tell someone. But who? My family didn't know. My friends, well, I'd never really let anyone close enough to ask. So I drove. Not anywhere in particular. Just away. Through country roads, past old fields, watching the light fade behind the trees. And somewhere between the hum of the tires and the quiet of my thoughts, I found myself remembering 2004, 17 years old, a summer night that smelled like smoke and beer. That's when I met him, Sean. Back then, I was just a kid trying to figure out who I was, quietly, secretly, in a world that didn't want me to. I didn't tell anyone I liked men. Didn't dare. In our town, you kept that sort of thing to yourself, or you paid for it. Sean was older, 24, maybe 25. He worked at a mechanic's garage on the edge of town. Everyone knew him. Everyone liked him. He had that kind of confidence that felt magnetic. The easy smile, the charm, the way he made you feel like you were the only one in the room when he talked to you. I was naive enough to believe it meant something. That I meant something. The night we met, there was a barbecue behind the pub. I can still see the flicker of flames, the laughter, the music. He offered me a drink, then another. We talked about music, about cars, about nothing really, but it felt like everything. When he said he needed a ride home later, it didn't feel strange. He was drunk, slurring a bit. He said he trusted me, and that was all I'd ever wanted, to be trusted. I didn't know that night would define the next 2 decades of my life. That night came back to me in flashes as I sat alone in my kitchen after jury duty. The weight of silence felt heavier than ever, but this time it wasn't just silence. It was memory, a memory that refused to stay buried any longer. I thought about those women in court, their courage, their tears, how they stood there, telling their truth, even when their voices shook. And something inside me whispered, if they can do it, so can you. But saying it and doing it are two very different things. Because when you've spent half your life pretending something didn't happen, when you've built your entire identity around not remembering, how do you start to speak? I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. By morning, I had made a decision. A terrifying one, but one I couldn't ignore anymore. I was going to tell someone. Finally. But first, I had to face the memory. All of it. The road. The car. The moment everything changed. Because to tell the truth, you have to remember it first. Looking back now, I think the universe has strange ways of forcing you to confront what you've been running from. I wasn't meant to be in that courtroom. I wasn't meant to hear those stories. But I did, and it broke something open in me. Sometimes I wonder if Sean ever thought about me, if he ever replayed that night in his mind. I doubt it. Men like him rarely do. But I've thought about it every single day for 20 years. And the difference now is that I'm done thinking in silence. I don't know where this road is going to lead. I don't know what reopening old wounds will do to me. But I know this. For the first time since 2004, I'm ready to speak. And once you start speaking, you can't go back. If I close my eyes, I can still smell that night. Smoke, charcoal, cheap beer, and something else, something heavy in the air, like a storm that never came. It was May 2004, the kind of English evening that never quite gets dark. Everyone was out, barbecues lit, music drifting through the open fields behind the pub. And that's where I met him. Sean. He was 24, maybe 25. Confident. Loud. He laughed like the world belonged to him. And I was 17. Awkward, trying to seem older, pretending I wasn't just a kid looking for someone to notice me. When he looked at me across the garden, I felt it instantly. That flicker of attention that feels like sunlight on cold skin. He smiled, raised his glass, and in that moment, I was hooked. He had this way of speaking, easy, effortless, the kind of voice that made you lean in closer without realizing it. We talked about nothing, really. Football, cars, music, but under all that, there was a current, something unspoken, something I didn't have the language for yet. When he asked if I'd drive him home later, it didn't sound strange. He said he'd had a few too many, that it wasn't safe to walk. I said yes before I even thought about it. The road out of town was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. He slouched against the window, head tilted, mumbling to himself. He smelled of beer and aftershave, that sharp, chemical mix that still makes my stomach turn when I catch it now. I remember him saying something about work, something about his ex, something about how people never understood him. Then, out of nowhere, he said it. Pull over. His voice wasn't loud, just different, like a switch had flipped. I thought he was going to be sick. I pulled over behind James Paget Hospital, the car park half empty, the air cold. He unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned forward, and said, "Turn the lights off." I remember laughing a little, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. When I turned the lights off, the world disappeared. Just shadows and the soft ticking of the engine cooling down. Then he reached over, grabbed my wrist. Hard. I froze. He was drunk, or maybe not as drunk as I'd thought. His words slurred, but his grip was steady. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my neck. I said his name, softly at first, then louder. Told him to stop. He didn't. And then it happened. The pain was blinding. White hot. The kind that doesn't feel like pain at first. It feels like confusion. Like your body can't process what's happening fast enough. I remember trying to push him off, my hands slipping, my voice breaking. He was stronger. He was heavy. It felt endless. And then suddenly, it was over. He pulled away, sat there for a second, breathing hard. Didn't look at me. Didn't say sorry. He just leaned back in his seat and muttered, "Drive." And I did. Because what else do you do when your mind has just shattered in half? The drive back was a blur. Streetlights flashing across his face, the smell of fuel, the sound of my heartbeat filling the silence. He fell asleep halfway there, his head slumped against the window, like nothing had happened. I dropped him at his flat. He got out without a word, didn't look back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the front door, my hands still shaking on the wheel. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to drive the car into a wall. But mostly, I felt nothing, just empty. I don't remember how I got home. I just remember my mother's house, the lights off, the smell of detergent from the laundry room. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and lay down. The ceiling looked like it was breathing. The air felt too thick. I kept replaying it, every second, every word, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Because that's what your mind does when someone takes everything from you. It looks for logic where there isn't any. It asks the wrong questions. Did I lead him on? Did I say something that made him think? No, I didn't. But 17-year-old me didn't know that. 17-year-old me thought it must have been his fault somehow, and mine too. Because how else could something that awful happen without a reason? That night, I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling until morning light started to creep through the blinds. For weeks after, I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not my friends. No one. Sean still walked around town like nothing had happened. Still laughed, still talked to people at the pub. And every time I saw him, I felt that same sickness rise in my chest. He even waved at me once. That's what stuck with me, the casualness of it. Like I was someone he'd just borrowed a lighter from, not someone he'd broken. I avoided him after that. Changed my routes. Stopped going to the places he might be. But in a town that small, you can't avoid someone forever. You just learn to shrink yourself around them, to disappear into the background until you're barely there at all. Years later, I'd try to piece the night together, like a puzzle missing half its pieces. The smell of the car, the sound of the rain starting halfway through the drive, the brief flash of the hospital sign in the mirror. I used to wonder if anyone saw us there that night, if someone passed by and thought nothing of it. Just two people parked behind a hospital, because that's what it looked like from the outside. Normal. Harmless. Forgettable. But for me, that night split my life in two, before and after. Before, I was a boy who thought he could be loved. After, I was someone who learned that love could be the thing that destroys you. When people talk about trauma, they use words like pain, fear, survival. But the real feeling? It's silence. It's the moment after, when everything is still, and you realize the world just kept moving. The stars still shine. The clock still ticks. And somehow, you're still breathing. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that morning, staring at my hands. They didn't look like my hands anymore. They looked foreign, like they belonged to someone who'd lived a whole other life overnight. And I think that's when the silence began, when I made the decision, without even realizing it, that I would never tell anyone. Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Because I didn't think what happened to me even counted. I was a boy. He was a man. And that was the end of it. At least, that's what I told myself. But the thing about silence is, it doesn't last forever. It waits. It builds. And when it finally breaks, it takes everything with it. I used to think time would fix it. That if I just kept moving, kept working, kept breathing, what happened that night would fade into something small. Something manageable. But it didn't. It spread. Like ink in water. And by the end of that summer, I could barely recognize myself. At 17, you're supposed to be figuring out who you are, who you want to be. But after that night, I didn't want to be anyone. I skipped classes, stopped answering calls, stopped eating. My mother thought it was just stress, exams, hormones, teenage mood swings. She'd knock on my door and ask, "Are you all right, love?" And I'd say, "Yeah, just tired." Because how do you tell your mother something like that? How do you say the words "he hurt me" when you can't even say I'm gay? The nights were worse. That's when the images came back, flashes of headlights, his hand on my wrist, the sound of his breathing. Sometimes I'd wake up and not know where I was. Just sweat, darkness, and that same voice echoing in my head. Pull over. After a while, I started to think maybe it was my fault for not fighting harder, for driving him home afterward, for keeping quiet. I didn't know that's what victims do. They freeze. They survive however they can. I just thought it made me weak. And weakness, where I grew up, was something you learned to hide. It took me months to go to the police. Months of pretending I was fine. Months of nightmares that left me gasping for air. I don't even remember what pushed me to do it. Maybe I just couldn't carry it alone anymore. It was September 2004 when I walked into Great Yarmouth Police Station. I remember the smell of coffee and disinfectant, the hum of computers, the officer at the front desk looking up at me with polite boredom. "Can I help you?" she asked. And I said, "Yes, I need to report something." Those words felt heavy, like I was dragging them up from underwater. She handed me a clipboard, asked if it was an assault or a dispute. I said it was rape. Her eyes flicked up for a second, then back down to the form. She didn't look shocked, just procedural. A detective came out a few minutes later, middle-aged, calm voice, led me into a side room with gray walls and no windows. They asked questions, gentle at first. What happened? When? Who? I told them about Sean, where we were, the hospital car park, the smell of beer, every detail I could remember. They took notes, nodded, recorded everything on a small black device that clicked when it turned on. I remember my throat burning halfway through, the words getting harder, but I kept talking because I thought, maybe, finally, this will matter. When I finished, the detective leaned back, sighed softly, and said, "All right, we'll look into it." That was it. No comfort, no follow-up questions, just paperwork. They gave me a leaflet, victim support, and told me someone would be in touch. Weeks passed, then months, and no one called. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped, only for it to be nothing. After 3 months, I went back to the station, asked for an update. The woman at the desk looked at the computer, frowned, and said, "There's no record of a case under that name." Just like that. Like it never existed. Like it was never real. I walked out of that building numb. Got halfway down the street before my knees gave out. That's when I realized something. The system didn't just fail me. It erased me. And for years after that, I believed maybe that was the right thing. Maybe it was better to forget. Maybe my story wasn't worth telling. I left town the next year. Moved in with a friend in Norwich. Got a job at a warehouse. Then another, at a prison. I thought being around walls, rules, authority, maybe that would make me feel safe. It didn't. Prisons have a sound, metal doors slamming, men shouting, the buzz of fluorescent lights that never turn off. It's a place full of stories people don't tell. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, you hear things you wish you hadn't. Men talking about what was done to them when they were young, what they did to others, how it all started. And every time I heard those stories, something inside me twisted, like I was still there, behind that hospital. Sometimes, I'd have to step into an empty cell just to breathe. Close the door, lean against the wall, wait for the shaking to stop. One night, an inmate lashed out, shoved me hard into the bars. He wasn't trying to hurt me, not really. But the impact, it sent me spiraling. For a split second, I was 17 again. The same fear, the same helplessness. I left early that night, went home, sat in the shower until the water ran cold. And I realized I'd spent almost 15 years pretending to be okay, and I wasn't. By 2018, I was running on fumes. No real friends. No relationship that lasted longer than a few months. Just work and sleep and the occasional bottle of whiskey to fill the space in between. That's when jury duty came. It's funny, I thought it would be an inconvenience. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to those women, watching them speak truth into a room full of strangers, it did something to me. It woke something up. I'd spent half my life wishing I could forget. But for the first time, I wished I could remember everything. Every detail I'd buried. Every word I'd swallowed. Because I realized something that day. If I stayed silent any longer, I'd be helping him. And I couldn't do that anymore. So I made a decision. 14 years after that night, I was going back. To the same town. The same police station. The same truth. But this time, I wouldn't let them ignore me. Looking back, I think the first time I went to the police, I wasn't ready to be believed. I was still trying to convince myself it even happened. Still blaming myself for things I didn't understand. But the second time, the man who walked into that station in 2018, he was different. Older, tired, but unafraid. Because I'd learned something by then. Silence doesn't erase pain. It just gives it time to grow roots. And by then, those roots had wrapped around every part of my life. Every thought, every night. I couldn't carry it anymore. When I sat down in front of those detectives again, 14 years later, I knew it might destroy me. But I also knew, if I didn't speak now, I never would. And that's where the Rayall story begins. They called it a routine trial. Just another Tuesday at Norwich Crown Court. But for me, it wasn't routine at all. Because sitting there, in that box, listening to her speak, was the first time I truly saw myself. I'd been selected for jury duty in early 2018. Didn't want it, didn't need it, but they said it was mandatory. The case was about a man accused of sexually assaulting 2 teenage girls, both 16 at the time. He was in his 40s. A teacher, respected, the kind of man who smiled too easily. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. No drama, no shouting, just air so heavy it made your chest tight. When the first girl took the stand, she looked terrified. Her voice barely made it through the microphone. She said she hadn't told anyone for years, because she thought no one would believe her. I remember that line exactly. No one would believe me. It was like she was speaking through time, straight into me. Every muscle in my body locked. My throat went dry. And for a moment, I wasn't in that courtroom anymore. I was 17 again. In that car. In that silence. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. Because there it was. Everything I'd buried. Standing on the witness stand, trembling, and still brave enough to speak. When the second girl testified, she said something that cracked me open. She said, "I thought if I kept quiet, it would make it go away. But silence just makes the person who hurt you stronger." The words hit me like a physical thing. I felt dizzy, angry, ashamed, because that's exactly what I'd done. Given Sean 20 years of silence. And in that silence, he'd gone on with his life. Married, had kids, laughed at barbecues, told stories about the old days. While I was still waking up in the middle of the night, shaking. By the time the judge dismissed us for lunch, I couldn't breathe. I stepped outside, into the courtyard. Cold air hit my face. I sat on the stone bench, staring at the ground. I'd spent half my life pretending that night didn't matter. But suddenly, it was all I could think about. And I realized something brutal. If that man could sit in court, accused of what he'd done, then maybe Sean should too. That evening, when I got home, I couldn't sit still. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, grated on me. I poured a drink, then another, but it didn't help. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer in my bedside table, the one I'd avoided for nearly 2 decades. Inside was the leaflet the police gave me in 2004. Victim support, you are not alone. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but I could still see my handwriting on the corner. The case number, the officer's name, Detective Sergeant Holloway. I stared at that name for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I didn't even know if the number would still work, but I called anyway. Voice, Norfolk Police, how can I help you? And I said, my name is Thomas. I reported a sexual assault years ago, but I don't think anything was ever done. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that feels like someone is deciding whether you matter. Then she said, all right, sir, let's start from the beginning. And that's how it began. Again, 2 weeks later, they called me in. A detective named Cole, younger, sharper, but kind. He met me in a quiet interview room, the walls pale blue, a single recorder on the table. He said, I've read your old statement. It's brief, but we're going to go through everything again. If you're ready. I wasn't ready, but I nodded anyway. For the first time in 14 years, I told the story properly. Every sound, every smell, every word Sean said. Cole didn't interrupt, didn't look away. He just listened. When I finished, he said, I believe you. 3 words. That's all it took to undo years of doubt. I didn't cry, not then, but something in me loosened. Like a knot I'd been carrying around for so long, I forgot it was there. He said they'd reopen the file, that they'd try to find Sean. That technology, DNA, everything had changed since 2004. And for the first time, I felt hope. Real hope. But hope doesn't last long in an investigation like this. Not when you're dealing with memory. And men who think time is a shield. Days turned into weeks. Then months. Each call from the police made my stomach twist. They found him, living 2 towns over. Still working in maintenance. Still drinking at the same pubs. When they questioned him, he denied everything. Said we'd messed around, that it was mutual. Those words made my skin crawl. Because that's what predators do. They twist the story until it looks almost believable. Cole told me not to lose faith. That these cases take time. That truth is patient, even when justice isn't. But it was hard. Hard knowing he was still out there. While I was still rebuilding from something he never had to face. Weeks later, the jury reached a decision. Guilty on all counts. The teacher, the man from the trial, was sentenced to 13 years. When the judge read the verdict, the girls cried. And for the first time, I saw what freedom looked like. Not happiness, not revenge, just release. That night, I sat in my car outside my flat, staring at the steering wheel. And I made a promise to myself that I would keep going, that I'd see this through, no matter how long it took. Because if those girls could stand in front of strangers and tell the truth, then so could I. Sometimes, life doesn't give you closure. It gives you reminders, small ones, until you can't ignore them anymore. That courtroom was my reminder, my reckoning. For years, I thought healing meant forgetting. But healing is remembering, without letting it destroy you. And that's what the jury box gave me. A reason to remember. When I left that courthouse, I didn't know where this road would lead. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't 17 anymore. And I wasn't scared to speak. There's something cruel about coming home. The streets look the same. The same cracked pavement. The same corner shop. The same sky that feels too big. But time changes you. And suddenly, every familiar thing feels like it's staring back. That's how Great Yarmouth felt when I returned in 2018. Like a place frozen in time. But one that remembered everything I'd tried to forget. 14 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last walked those streets. Since that night behind the hospital. Now I was back. Not as the boy who'd driven down that dark road, but as a man trying to build a case against the person who ruined him there. Detective Cole met me outside the station. He handed me a coffee, said, I know this isn't easy, but memory lives in places. Sometimes you have to stand where it happened to remember what you couldn't before. I nodded, but my chest was tight. We started with the obvious, the car parked behind James Paget Hospital. It looked smaller than I remembered. The trees were taller. There was a new fence, a new security light, but the shadows were the same. I stood there just breathing, watching the fog curl across the asphalt. Cole didn't say anything. He just waited. Then it came. The sound I hadn't remembered before. A car door slamming. Not mine. Somewhere behind us. Faint, but real. Then laughter. Two voices, one of them Sean's. The other deeper, rougher. For years, I told myself it was just the wind. Just my imagination. But now, standing there again, I knew better. There'd been someone else there that night. When we got back to the station, Cole leaned forward across the desk. You said before you thought you were alone. Are you certain you heard another voice? I nodded slowly. It was hazy, but it was there. Sean had shouted something before he pulled me from the car. Something like, "He's fine, mate, I've got him." Then silence. Then pain. Cole scribbled a note. His expression shifted, just slightly, into something sharper. That could be significant, he said. If someone else was there, it changes things. It did more than change things. It tore a hole in the story I'd lived with for 20 years. Because if Sean hadn't been alone, then who else was there that night? The next few months blurred into a cycle of interviews and waiting. They brought me photos. Old CCTV stills from the hospital's perimeter. Most were grainy. Most showed nothing but empty roads and flickering lights. But then there was one, time-stamped 043, May 21st, 2004. A car. My car. And parked behind it, another vehicle. A black Ford Mondeo, registered to a man named Aaron Fielding. Cole said Sean and Aaron used to work together at the garage. Two mates, always drinking together. The name didn't ring a bell, but when they showed me his picture, something in my stomach turned. I remembered that face. Not from that night, but from before. The barbecue. He'd been there, laughing with Sean, smoke rising behind them, beer in hand. And now, 14 years later, his car had been sitting behind mine on the night everything changed. When the police questioned Aaron, he denied everything. Said he'd been picking Sean up, that I'd consented, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But there were cracks in his story. Small ones, but enough. He couldn't explain the fingerprints found on my passenger door. He couldn't explain why his phone pinged off a cell tower just 200 meters from the hospital at midnight. He couldn't explain the scratches on his wrist, documented in photos from the next morning when he'd been arrested for drunk and disorderly behavior in town. Two different crimes. One same night, Cole told me quietly, "We think you might not have been the only victim." The air left my lungs. The idea that there might have been others, that Sean and Aaron could have done this before, or again, was almost too much to process. But it also gave me something I hadn't had in years: purpose. Returning home meant facing another truth. My family still didn't know. My mother lived in the same house, her garden now overrun with ivy. She opened the door, surprised. I hadn't seen her in years. "Thomas, what on earth brings you back?" I told her I was helping with a police case. She asked what kind. I said, "An old one." She made tea. We sat in silence, the clock ticking between us. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said quietly, "This is about him, isn't it?" My heart stopped. I never said Sean's name. Not once. But she knew. Maybe she always had. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and said, "You don't have to carry this anymore, love. You did nothing wrong." For 20 years, I'd waited to hear those words. And when they finally came, I couldn't speak. I just nodded, and for the first time, I cried in front of her. By late 2020, the case had grown. 2 more men had come forward, both from the same town, both assaulted around the same time. One of them had been 17, the other 15. Both described Sean. Both remembered a second man, Aaron. Their stories lined up with mine almost exactly. And suddenly, what had once felt like a personal nightmare became something else entirely. A pattern. A hunt. Cole told me they were preparing charges. He said it would take time, but justice was finally moving. That night, I went back to the hospital alone. I don't know why. Maybe to see it one last time. Maybe to make peace. The car park was empty, silent. The new security light flickered faintly against the trees. I stood there in the same spot I had all those years ago. Closed my eyes. Listened. And for a moment, I swear I heard it. That same second car door closing. That same faint laughter. Maybe memory plays tricks. Maybe not. But standing there, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't haunted by the attack itself anymore. I was haunted by what came after. The silence. The disbelief. The years I spent trying to make myself small. But not anymore. Because for the first time since that night, the truth was louder than the silence. Coming back here didn't give me peace. But it gave me clarity. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. In a quiet interview room. In a trembling voice. In a faded photograph that finally makes sense. And maybe that's all it takes. One whisper loud enough to start an echo. If you've never waited for justice, you don't know how heavy waiting can feel. It's not silence. Not really. It's a kind of noise. The endless hum of thoughts that won't stop spinning. The whisper of what-ifs that crawl into every corner of your day. And that's what the next 3 years were for me. Noise. Waiting. Doubt. After they charged Sean and Aaron, I thought things would move fast. They didn't. There were delays. First procedural, then pandemic. Court backlogs. Paperwork. New evidence reviews. It all stretched endlessly. At first, I tried to stay patient. Cole would call once a week, sometimes twice. He'd say, "It's moving, Thomas." Slowly, but it's moving. But months turned into seasons. And the world kept spinning. People went to work, fell in love, made plans. And I stayed here, stuck in the same small flat, waiting for the past to catch up. I kept a notebook. A kind of therapy, I suppose. Every page filled with fragments. Memories, court updates, nightmares, songs I couldn't stop hearing. It didn't make me feel better, but it gave the pain somewhere to go. They warned me about it. How testifying could trigger everything you've buried. But I didn't expect it to start before the trial even began. The flashbacks were sharper now. Full color, full sound. Not dreams. Memories. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, feeling his weight again, hearing his voice slur pull over. Some nights I'd turn on the light and sit upright until morning, just waiting for my heart to stop racing. At work, I was quieter. Colleagues asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. They believed me. The truth is, trauma makes you an excellent actor. Cole suggested I talk to someone. A trauma counselor through victim support. Her name was Margaret. Soft-spoken. Kind eyes. She asked me, "What are you most afraid of when this goes to trial?" I said, "That no one will believe me." Again, she paused, then said something that stayed with me since. "Thomas, justice isn't about belief. It's about truth. And truth has a way of surviving disbelief." I wrote that line down. I read it every morning before work. It didn't make the waiting easier, but it kept me steady. Every few months, I'd get a new letter. Pre-trial review. Plea hearing. Adjourned. Each time, the same pit opened in my stomach. I'd build myself up, prepare to face him. And then, another delay. By late 2021, it had been 3 years since I'd come forward again. 3 years of preparing for a day that never came. Then one morning, Cole called. I could tell from his voice before he said a word. They've changed their pleas. Sean was maintaining not guilty. Aaron had folded. He'd pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting assault. He got 2 years. 2 years for standing there and watching. And Sean, the one who'd done it, still refused to admit a thing. I hung up the phone and sat on the floor. It felt like my body couldn't hold the anger anymore. All that waiting, all that truth, and he still wanted to fight it. When you live with trauma long enough, you learn to measure time differently, not in days or weeks, but in before and after. Before the attack, after the attack, before the call, after the call. My world shrank to the size of the trial that never seemed to come. Friends drifted. Relationships failed. I became someone who lived in half-light. Always tired, always waiting. Always trying not to think about what I'd have to say on the stand. And yet, beneath all that numbness, there was something else building. Something like resolve. Because I'd already survived the worst night of my life. What could another courtroom do to me? Early 2023. Cole called again. His voice was steady this time. We have a trial date, Thomas. November. Norwich Crown Court. For a second, I couldn't speak. 3 words. We have a date. And my world shifted again. It was finally happening. But the relief didn't last long. Because after 20 years of silence, I'd have to tell the story out loud. Not to a detective, not to a counselor, but to 12 strangers who would decide if it was real. They brought me in to prepare for testimony. There was a practice room, a mock witness stand, a legal advisor explaining how the defense might cross-examine me. They may ask why you waited so long. They may question your memory. They may suggest you wanted it. Each sentence felt like a small cut, but I listened because I needed to know what was coming. Afterwards, Cole looked at me and said, "You've carried this longer than anyone should have to. You're allowed to be scared, Thomas. Just don't let fear make you silent again." I nodded, because that was the real fight. Not just against Sean, but against silence itself. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my flat, touching things I hadn't noticed in years. A photo of me and Mom, a half-read book, the scar on my wrist from when I was 17. Every object felt heavier somehow, like it knew what was coming. Around 3 a.m., I went to the mirror, stared at myself, and for the first time, I said his name out loud. Sean Gilder, the man who broke me, the man who thought I'd stay quiet forever. And I said, "You don't get to live in my head anymore." Then I turned off the light. Waiting for justice doesn't make you strong. It breaks you, and then it makes you rebuild. Slowly, painfully, from the pieces left behind. But sometimes, in that rebuilding, you find something unexpected. Clarity. I'd waited 20 years to stand in that courtroom. And now, I was ready, not just to tell the truth, but to be free from it. This is the heart of the story, the confrontation, the courtroom tension, the collapse, and the courage. It's written in the quiet, documentary tone of Nest stories, reflective, raw, almost whispered at times, like the kind of story told in the dark, long after it's over. There's a smell that all courthouses share. Old paper, coffee, dust, and nerves. I could feel it before I even stepped inside. It was November, gray sky, cold air, and everything I'd buried for 20 years, waiting just beyond those doors. Cole met me by the entrance. He was in his usual blue suit, steady, calm, like a man who'd done this too many times. "You ready?" he asked. I said I was. But the truth is, no one's ever ready to face their past. Not like this. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. A wooden dock, pale green walls. 12 chairs lined neatly in the jury box. And then him, Sean, sitting just a few feet away. Gray now, heavier, but with the same eyes. Cold, detached. He looked at me once. A flicker, almost bored, and looked away. That tiny glance was enough to bring everything back. When they called my name, my legs didn't want to move, but somehow they did. I took the oath. My hands were shaking so much. I could barely hold the paper. The prosecutor started gently. Her voice was calm, patient. "Can you tell the jury what happened that night, Thomas?" And there it was. The question that had lived inside me for 2 decades. I started at the beginning. The party, the drinks, the car, the road by the quarry. As I spoke, I could feel the room fade around me. It wasn't 2023 anymore. It was 2003 again. The air, the smell of mud and petrol, the sound of my voice begging him to stop. My throat closed up. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. He told me no one would believe me. He said he'd done this before. The jury was silent. No one looked away. I could see one woman blinking back tears. Another writing notes, hand trembling. When I finished, the prosecutor gave me a small nod, the kind that says you did it. But it wasn't over. Then came the defense. A man in a sharp black suit stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked toward me like a man inspecting something fragile. "Mr. Hale," he began, "you say this happened 20 years ago." I nodded. "That's quite some time. Would you agree memories fade?" I said, "Some do. Not this one." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that's not really a smile. "You didn't report it until much later. Why wait so long, Thomas?" I swallowed. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward. "Because I was scared," I said. "Because he told me no one would believe me. And because he was right. For a while, no one did." The room stayed silent. Even the clerk looked up from her notes. He pressed harder. He questioned my memory, my motives, the gaps in the timeline. At one point, he even asked if I'd confused dreams with real events. Cole objected. The judge agreed. But by then, I was shaking. When I stepped down from the stand, my body gave out. I remember sitting in the witness room, head in my hands, trying to breathe. Cole came in. He didn't say anything at first, just placed a cup of tea in front of me. Then he said, "He's losing, Thomas. Don't let him make you doubt what you know." And for the first time that week, I believed him. The next day, they called Aaron, the one who'd pleaded guilty to aiding. He walked in looking like a ghost, hands shaking, eyes down. When they asked if Sean had attacked me, he hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." Just that. One word, and everything in the room shifted. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until that moment. The prosecutor spoke first. She told the jury that truth doesn't fade with time. It only waits for courage. Then the defense tried to cast doubt, tried to paint 20 years as proof of uncertainty. But the jury wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. We waited 3 hours. Longest 3 hours of my life. When the door finally opened, I couldn't look up. The clerk stood. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" "We have. On the charge of sexual assault." "How do you find the defendant?" A pause. A breath. "Guilty." The room blurred. I don't remember standing, or crying, or Cole's hand on my shoulder. Just that word. Guilty. After 20 years. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. Sean was sentenced to 8 years. Not enough, but enough to matter. When they led him away, he turned once, as if he wanted to speak, but there was nothing left to say. Outside, the sky was still gray, but it looked different somehow. Lighter. Cole asked how I felt. I said, empty, but free. Justice doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't heal you overnight, but it gives the truth a place to live. Outside of you. For 20 years, that truth had been my prison. And now, finally, it belonged to the world. They tell you that once the verdict comes, it's over. You walk out of court, breathe fresh air, and the world is supposed to feel different. But it doesn't. At least not right away. For a long time after the trial, the world felt too quiet. The silence that used to suffocate me. Now it followed me everywhere, like a shadow that refused to leave. I stayed with my sister for a while. She made tea every morning, kept the news off, and never once asked me how I was doing. It was her way of protecting me, by pretending everything was normal. But normal had died a long time ago. At night, I'd wake up gasping, sometimes from dreams that weren't dreams. just memories replaying themselves. On a loop I couldn't shut off. The road, the car door slamming, the smell of his breath, even knowing he was behind bars. My body didn't believe it yet. A week after the verdict, a journalist called, said they wanted to do a human interest piece, a survivor's story. I said no. They ran something anyway. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't matter. People in town knew. They always do. The whispers started again. Some kind, some cruel. A few people left notes in my mailbox. You're brave. You did the right thing. And one that simply said, why wait 20 years? That one hurt the most. Cole stopped by a few weeks later. He didn't have to. The case was closed. But he said he just wanted to check in. He brought pastries, sat at my kitchen table, and asked if I'd been sleeping. I lied, said I was fine. Before he left, he said something I'll never forget. You think justice is an ending, Thomas. It isn't. It's a door. You still have to walk through it. At the time, I didn't really understand what he meant. Now I do. About a month after the trial, I started going through the old police files they'd returned to me. Photos, notes, statements. And that's when I saw it. A line from the original 2004 report, written in a hand that wasn't mine. Witness, male, mid-20s, seen near vehicle around midnight. A witness. Someone was there. But the note ended there. No name, no follow-up, no address. I stared at it for hours. How had I never seen that before? Was it someone I knew? Someone who saw what happened? Or someone who was meant to be there? For days after, I couldn't shake it. What if Sean hadn't been alone? What if someone else helped and walked free? I told myself to let it go, to rest, to stop digging. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw two shadows instead of one, and the sound of the car door. It wasn't just one door slamming, was it? There were two. I started therapy that winter. For the first time in years, I said things out loud I'd only ever whispered. Some days, I left feeling lighter. Other days, I sat in my car in the parking lot and just cried. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a circle. Some days you walk forward. Other days you end up right where you started. But at least you're moving. And that's what matters. In February 2025, a year after the verdict, I went back to the road behind James Paget Hospital. It hadn't changed much. Same cracked pavement. Same broken fence. Same cold air that carried nothing but silence. I parked the car and sat there, watching the headlights fade as the traffic passed. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid of that place anymore. I stepped out, walked to the exact spot where it happened. The earth was wet, soft under my shoes. I whispered, "It's over." And maybe, for a moment, it was. I live differently now. Small things mean more. A warm morning. A cup of tea that doesn't go cold before I finish it. A friend who calls just to ask if I'm okay. And sometimes, when I wake up before sunrise, I sit by the window and just breathe. Because for the first time in my life, the silence doesn't scare me anymore. It's peace. Real, quiet peace. I used to think this story was about what he did to me. But it's not. It's about what I did next. About finding my voice. About standing up in a room full of strangers and telling the truth. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to be free. And maybe that's all justice really is. Not punishment, just freedom. From the lie, from the fear, from the silence.